A reclusive millionaire returned to her childhood home only to be paralyzed by the sight of a small boy being forced to hold 2 heavy buckets of water in her late mother's once pristine garden. The man overseeing the punishment, a figure of polished local charm, smiled and waved as if it were a perfectly normal summer afternoon. Why would a child be forced into an agonizing posture of punishment in his own backyard? And who was the real monster hiding behind the perfectly manicured hedges? Elara Vance felt the ghost of her mother in every dust mote dancing in the slanted afternoon light. The house on Sycamore Lane was a museum of a life well lived, and now a monument to her absence. Returning after a decade spent building a financial empire from the cold, sterile canyons of the city was like stepping into a dream she'd half forgotten. The air still smelled of dried lavender and lemon polish. The grandfather clock in the hall still chimed a quarter-hour late. But the silence was different now. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of her mother's retirement. It was the hollow, echoing silence of finality. For 3 days, Elara had walked these halls, her footsteps muted on the Persian rugs, touching the spines of books her mother had loved, tracing the rim of a teacup left on the mantelpiece. She had come here not to sell, not yet, but to grieve in the last place on earth that felt like home. Her own life, a fortress of solitude built with wealth and success, offered no such comfort. It was a life of clean lines, closed deals, and emotional distance. A defense mechanism she had perfected after a loss so profound it had reshaped the very architecture of her soul. She had learned long ago that vulnerability was a liability, and love a risk with too great a downside. So she had protected herself, amassing a fortune that could buy anything but the one thing she'd lost. From the kitchen window, which overlooked the sprawling garden her mother had nurtured into a local legend, Elara saw that the house next door had changed. The Finches, the elderly couple who had shared decades of neighborly kindness with her mother, were gone. In their place was a new family, one her mother had mentioned only briefly in their last few calls. A young woman named Sarah and her son, Leo, and the new man, Marcus Thorne. Her mother's voice, frail over the phone, had held a note of reservation. "He's very charming, dear," she had said. "The whole neighborhood is quite taken with him." Even then, Elara had detected the unspoken. But, now, looking out, she saw the physical manifestation of that hesitation. The Finches' once perfect lawn was manicured to an almost unnatural perfection, the flower beds stark and geometric, all the wild, chaotic beauty ripped out and replaced with something cold and orderly, felt sterile, a performance of suburban perfection. A high, dark green privacy hedge now separated the two properties, a stark contrast to the low, friendly picket fence that had stood there for 50 years. It felt less like a boundary and more like a wall. An unease, subtle as a change in barometric pressure, settled over her. Something was wrong. It was a feeling she trusted, a primal instinct honed in boardrooms where predators wore $1,000 suits and smiled while they sharpened their knives. She saw the man, Marcus, standing on his patio, talking on his phone. He was exactly as her mother had described, handsome, confident, radiating an aura of effortless success. He laughed into the phone, a bright, public sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. His gaze swept the yard, a look of proprietary assessment, before landing on a small figure standing unervingly still in the center of the lawn. That was when the world tilted on its axis. The boy, who could be no older than 6 or 7, was holding 2 galvanized steel buckets, the kind used for farm work or carrying cement mix. They were clearly heavy, far too heavy for a child his size. His arms were held straight out from his sides, parallel to the ground, in a posture of excruciating strain. His small face was pale, beaded with sweat under the relentless July sun. His knuckles were white, his shoulders trembling with the effort. He was staring straight ahead, his expression a heartbreaking mask of stoic endurance, as if he had been taught that any show of pain would only make it worse. Elara's breath caught in her throat. Her heart, a long dormant thing she kept carefully guarded, seized with a cold, protective fury. She watched as Marcus ended his call, his smile vanishing as he turned his full attention to the boy. He walked over, not with concern, but with the lazy stride of an inspector. He tapped one of the buckets with his finger, making it sway. The boy winced, a tiny gasp escaping his lips as he struggled to stabilize the weight. Marcus said something Alara couldn't hear, his voice a low murmur, but the boy's reaction was clear. He flinched, his shoulders drawing up towards his ears, and his eyes squeezed shut for a moment. This wasn't a game. This wasn't a quirky parenting choice. This was torture, methodical and cruel, performed in the open air of a sunny afternoon. And then Marcus looked up, his eyes meeting Alara's through the kitchen window. He didn't startle. He didn't look guilty. He smiled, a wide, friendly, neighborly smile, and gave a little wave, as if inviting her to admire his handiwork. As if this grotesque display was something to be proud of. The casualness of it, the sheer, unadulterated evil hiding behind that charming facade, struck Alara with the force of a physical blow. In that moment, the dust motes and lavender scents of her mother's house faded away, replaced by a singular, ice-cold clarity. The grief for her past was eclipsed by a burning purpose for the present. She had returned to this house to close a chapter of her life, but now she knew she was here to start a new one. She was here to tear down that wall, both literal and figurative, and bring whatever horrors were hiding behind it into the light. Alara moved from the window, her body acting on an instinct she hadn't felt in years. The quiet, observational stillness that defined her professional life gave way to a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. It was a cold, clean fire, burning away the fog of her personal sorrow. She pushed open the back door, the familiar creak of its hinges sounding like a call to arms. The heat of the day enveloped her, thick and cloying, but she barely felt it. Her focus was entirely on the small, trembling figure across the hedge. She walked the length of her mother's overgrown garden, her expensive leather shoes sinking into the soft earth, not caring about the burrs that clung to her tailored trousers. As she drew closer to the hedge, she could hear them now. The boy's ragged, shallow breaths. The low, menacing tone of the man. "Discipline, Leo," Marcus was saying, his voice a grotesque parody of paternal wisdom. "This is how we build character. This is how you learn to be strong. Crying is for the weak. Do you want to be weak?" The boy shook his head, a tiny, jerky movement, his eyes fixed on some distant point in the grass. His lips were trembling, but he made no sound. Alara's hand clenched into a fist at her side. Character wasn't built by breaking a child's spirit. It was forged in compassion, in safety, in love, all the things this man was methodically destroying. Then, she heard the words that would haunt her, the words that sealed Marcus Thorne's fate. In a voice so small it was barely a whisper, a thread of sound frayed by pain, the boy said, "My arms hurt." Marcus let out a soft, dismissive chuckle. "Of course they hurt. That's the point. The pain is a reminder not to track mud in the house, a reminder to do as you're told. Now hold them steady. Another 10 minutes, 10 minutes. Alara did a quick, cold calculation. To a child in that state, 10 minutes was an eternity of agony. It was long enough to cause real, lasting damage, both to his small body and his developing soul. She had seen enough. She found a small gap in the dense foliage of the hedge, a place where the leaves were thinner, and pushed through. The branches scratched at her arms, but she didn't feel it. She stepped into their yard, a silent intruder in their perfectly manicured hell. The sudden appearance of a stranger in his private domain startled Marcus. His mask of calm control flickered, revealing a flash of raw, violent anger in his eyes before it was quickly suppressed. He straightened up, his charming smile snapping back into place like a shield. "Well, hello there," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "You must be Alara, a Marcus Thorne. Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm so sorry about your mother. She was a lovely woman." The casual, practiced sympathy was obscene. Alara ignored his outstretched hand. Her gaze was fixed on Leo. Up close, he was even smaller, more fragile. His t-shirt was damp with sweat, clinging to his thin frame. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on his cheek. His arms were shaking violently now, the buckets sloshing, spilling water onto the grass around his worn sneakers. "Put the buckets down, son," Alara said, her voice quiet but carrying an authority that was absolute. It was the voice she used to command boardrooms, to end negotiations, to make billion-dollar decisions. It was a voice that did not brook argument. Leo's eyes, wide and filled with a mixture of terror and a desperate, flickering hope, darted from Alara to Marcus. He was trapped between two opposing forces, and his fear of the one he lived with was clearly greater. He didn't move. Marcus's smile tightened. "I'm afraid he can't do that," he said, stepping between Alara and the boy, a subtle act of ownership. "Leo and I are in the middle of a lesson, a very important one about consequences." "This isn't a lesson," Alara stated, her voice dropping, becoming colder, harder. "This is abuse." The word hung in the hot, still air between them. Marcus's facade cracked again. "Now, hold on a minute," he said, his tone shifting from friendly to condescending. "I don't think it's your place to judge my parenting methods. Leo is a difficult child. He needs a firm hand. His mother, Sarah, she's too soft on him. I'm just providing the structure he desperately needs." He was gaslighting her, painting himself as the concerned, rational caregiver and her as the hysterical, interfering stranger. It was a classic textbook maneuver of a manipulator. But he wasn't dealing with a cowed victim. He was dealing with Alara Vance. She took a step forward, forcing him to take a step back. She was not physically imposing, but her presence, her focused intensity, was overwhelming. "Let the child put the buckets down," she repeated, each word a chip of ice. Now a flicker of uncertainty crossed Marcus's face. He was assessing her, weighing the risk of defying this strange, formidable woman against the risk of appearing weak. Before he could decide, a woman came out of the back door of the house. She was slender, with pale skin and tired eyes that seemed to have forgotten how to hold any light. This had to be Sarah, Leo's mother. "Marcus? Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice thin and anxious. She saw Alara and flinched, pulling her cardigan tighter around herself despite the heat. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize we had company." "This is Alara Vance, dear," Marcus said, his charm returning instantly, his hand going to the small of Sarah's back in a gesture that looked protective but was clearly about control. "Eleanor's daughter." She was just admiring our garden. Sarah offered a weak, watery smile. "It's nice to meet you." Her eyes flickered towards her son, a brief, sharp pang of maternal pain crossing her face before it was quickly veiled. She saw his suffering, but she was either unable or unwilling to stop it. Alara understood then. Sarah was a victim, too, trapped in the same web of control and manipulation as her son. This realization didn't soften Alara's resolve. It hardened it. There were two people here who needed saving. "Let him go," Alara said, her voice now directed at both of them. "Or I will call the police and Child Protective Services, and I will stand here and make sure they listen." The threat was bald, stripped of any social nicety. The mention of official authorities made Sarah gasp. Marcus's face darkened with fury. For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the buzzing of cicadas and the sloshing of the water in the trembling buckets. Finally, with a look of pure venom directed at Alara, Marcus nodded curtly at the boy. "All right, Leo. You're done." The relief on the boy's face was instantaneous and devastating. The buckets crashed to the ground with a loud thud, water splashing everywhere. Leo's arms dropped to his sides, but they didn't hang naturally. They seemed frozen, locked in that unnatural position. He whimpered, a low, animal sound of pure agony, and cradled his arms against his chest, tears finally streaming down his face. The sight broke through the last of Alara's carefully constructed defenses. The ghost of her own lost child, a memory she kept locked in the deepest vault of her heart, rose up, its voice screaming at her to act. She had failed to protect her own. She would not fail this one. Alara made her silent vow right there, standing on the unnaturally green lawn, the scent of spilled water and cut grass in the air. She would not let this go. She would not be deterred by charming smiles or veiled threats. She would use every resource at her disposal, her wealth, her intellect, her unyielding will, to dismantle Marcus Thorne and free this child and his mother from his poison. This was no longer just a neighborly dispute. It was a mission. With a final, lingering look at Leo, who was now being hurried inside by a visibly shaken Sarah, Alara turned and walked back through the hedge without another word. The time for confrontation was over. The time for strategy had begun. Back in the sanctuary of her mother's kitchen, Alara's hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a surfeit of adrenaline. She wrapped them around a cold mug, the ceramic grounding her. She replayed the scene in her mind, analyzing every detail, every word, every micro-expression. Marcus's immediate shift from charm to menace. Sarah's terrified passivity. Leo's disciplined, silent suffering. It was a classic portrait of domestic tyranny. Marcus had them isolated and controlled. He had likely convinced Sarah that his methods were necessary, that she was an inadequate parent, and that Leo was a problem child who required extreme measures. He had created a closed system of abuse, and Alara had just kicked the door in. He would not be pleased. He would retaliate. He would try to discredit her, to paint her as an interfering, unstable woman. She needed to be smarter, faster, and more ruthless than he was. Her first move was not to call the police. Not yet. She knew how men like Marcus operated. They were masters of manipulation. He would have a plausible story ready. He would charm the responding officers, present himself as the victim of a hysterical neighbor, and without concrete evidence, it would become a messy, he said. She said, situation that could ultimately make things worse for Leo. No, she needed irrefutable proof. She needed to build a case so airtight that he couldn't wriggle his way out of it. Her mind, accustomed to complex financial analysis and corporate warfare, began to map out a campaign. First, reconnaissance. She needed to know everything about Marcus Thorne. His history, his finances, his social connections. Second, surveillance. She needed to document the abuse. Third, allies. She would need legal counsel, and she would need to find a way to reach Sarah, to empower her to break free. She started immediately. Within an hour, she had engaged the top private investigation firm in the state, a discreet and highly effective group she had used in the past for corporate due diligence. She gave them a single name, Marcus Thorne. The brief was simple. I want to know everything. Every job he's had, every address he's lived at, every relationship he's been in, every dollar he's ever owed. I want to know where the skeletons are buried. The retainer she paid, transferred electronically without a second thought, was more than most people make in a year. To Alara, it was nothing, a necessary expense, a tool. Next, she turned her attention to the property. The high hedge was a problem. It was designed to conceal. She needed eyes and ears. That evening, as dusk settled over the quiet street, she did a slow, careful walk around the perimeter of her own property, assessing sight lines. From her second-story office window, she had a clear, if distant, view of their backyard. It wasn't enough. She thought about technology. Long-range microphones, high-powered cameras. All of it was possible, but it also carried risks. She needed something more subtle. Her gaze fell upon the old, gnarled oak tree in her mother's yard, its heavy branches extending over the property line, providing a canopy of shade for a corner of Marcus's lawn. It was perfect. The next day, a man from a specialized arboricultural service, in reality, a tech specialist from a security firm she kept on retainer, spent 2 hours in that tree. When he was done, a series of tiny, weatherproof, motion-activated cameras and audio recorders were nestled invisibly among the leaves and bark. They were state-of-the-art, with night vision and a feed that streamed directly and securely to her laptop and phone. The invasion of privacy would have given her pause in any other circumstance, but this was not any other circumstance. This was a war, and Leo was the territory she was fighting for. The initial reports from the private investigator started coming in within 48 hours. The public picture of Marcus Thorne was exactly as he presented it. A successful consultant, a pillar of his previous community, a man involved in local charities. But beneath the surface there were cracks. A string of failed business ventures, always leaving others holding the bag. A significant amount of debt, cleverly hidden through a series of shell corporations. A previous engagement that had been abruptly broken off, with the woman signing a non-disclosure agreement. It was a pattern of deception and financial predation. He wasn't a successful man. He was a con artist who was very good at playing the part. The most damning detail was a restraining order filed against him 5 years prior by a former business partner, alleging threats and intimidation. The order had been temporary and was later dropped when the partner suddenly moved out of state. It was a red flag the size of a billboard. While the PI dug deeper, Alara watched the live feed from the cameras. For days, nothing overtly cruel happened. Marcus was on his best behavior. He played catch with Leo in the yard. He laughed and smiled. It was a perfect performance, and Alara knew it was for her benefit. He knew she was watching. He was mocking her, daring her to find fault. But the audio told a different story. The microphones were sensitive enough to pick up conversations inside the house when the windows were open. She heard Marcus's tone shift the moment they were indoors. The playful father figure vanished, replaced by a cold, demanding disciplinarian. "Did you finish your homework? Show me. This is pathetic, Leo. Are you stupid? Do it again. Why is there a toy on the floor? I've told you about this. Everything has a place. Put it away. Now," and his words to Sarah were a constant stream of subtle emotional manipulation. "You see, Sarah? He doesn't listen to you because you're too soft. They need to know who's in charge. Don't worry about the finances, honey. I've got it all under control. You just focus on being a good mother and keeping the house nice." He was systematically eroding their confidence, isolating them, making them dependent on him. Alara knew she needed to find a way to speak to Leo alone, away from the house. An opportunity presented itself a week later. She saw Sarah and Leo leaving the house to walk to the small park at the end of the street. Marcus was gone for the day, a fact she had confirmed by having her PI track his car. Alara waited a few minutes and then followed, taking her mother's old, friendly-looking golden retriever, who was staying with her temporarily, as a prop. She found them by the swings. Sarah was sitting on a bench, staring blankly into the distance, while Leo swung listlessly, his small legs barely moving. He looked pale and tired. Alara approached casually, letting the dog run ahead. The retriever, a gentle soul, trotted right up to Leo and nudged his hand with its wet nose. For the first time, a genuine smile lit up the boy's face. He slid off the swing and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. "He's beautiful," Sarah said, her voice startling Alara. She hadn't noticed her watching. "This is Chester," Alara said, offering a small smile. "He was my mother's." The mention of her mother created a small bridge between them. "I'm Alara. We haven't been properly introduced." "Sarah," she replied, her gaze dropping to her hands. I wanted to apologize for the other day. Marcus was. He can be very intense about rules." "It's all right," Alara said gently, her eyes on Leo, who was now whispering secrets into Chester's furry ear. "Leo seems to be a very well-behaved boy." Sarah's face clouded over. "Marcus says he's defiant. That I don't see it because I'm his mother. He says Leo needs a strong hand, or he'll end up in trouble." It was exactly as Alara had suspected. Marcus had twisted Sarah's maternal love into a perceived weakness. "All children need love and patience," Alara said carefully. "Firmness is one thing. Cruelty is another." Sarah flinched at the word cruelty. A silent admission that she knew, on some level, that what was happening was wrong. But the fear in her eyes was overwhelming. Fear of Marcus, fear of being alone, fear of failing her son. Before the conversation could go any further, Leo came running over, his face animated for the first time. "His name is Chester," he said to his mom. "Can we get a dog?" "Oh, honey, you know Marcus is allergic," Sarah said automatically, her voice flat. Alara knew for a fact this was a lie. The PI report had included photos of Marcus with his ex-fiancée, proudly holding their 2 terriers. It was another small, insidious lie designed to isolate the boy from a potential source of comfort and joy. Alara knelt down to Leo's level. "Chester likes you a lot," she said softly. Leo looked at her, his eyes wide and searching. In them, she saw a flicker of the hope she'd seen that first day. He trusted her. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, smooth, gray stone she had picked up from the beach near her city penthouse. "I want you to have this," she said, pressing it into his small hand. "It's a wishing stone. You hold it tight and think of something happy, and it helps you feel brave." He closed his fingers around it, his small hand barely concealing the stone. He looked from the stone to her, and his lips formed a single silent word. "Thanks." At that moment, Alara knew that no matter what it took, no matter how long, she would not, could not, fail this child. She had made a promise, and she intended to keep it. She had the resources, she had the motive, and now, she had the beginning of a connection with the very person she needed to save. The war for Leo's future had officially begun. The next phase of Alara's plan required a more delicate touch. She had the external surveillance, but she needed to understand what was happening inside the house when the windows were closed and the curtains were drawn. She needed an asset on the inside, and her only option was Leo himself. The idea of using a traumatized child in her investigation felt deeply wrong, but the alternative, allowing the abuse to continue undocumented, was unthinkable. She had to find a way to give him a voice, a way for him to show her what was happening without having to speak the words he was clearly terrified to say. The boy's 7th birthday was approaching. Sarah had mentioned it at the park, a sad note in her voice, as if the celebration itself were a burden. This was Alara's opening. She needed a gift, something that would be welcomed into the house, something that Leo would cherish and keep close, and something that could house the technology she needed. A teddy bear. It was a Trojan horse, classic and unassuming. But it wouldn't be just any bear. She spent 2 days working with her security tech. They sourced a large, plush, incredibly soft teddy bear with kind, glassy eyes. The tech, a man named Julian who specialized in covert devices, hollowed out a small portion of the stuffing and embedded a sophisticated audio and video recorder behind one of the bear's eyes. The lens was virtually undetectable. It was voice-activated, had a battery life of over a week, and would upload its encrypted files to a secure cloud server whenever it detected a Wi-Fi signal. It was a marvel of miniaturized espionage, all hidden inside a child's toy. Getting the bear into the house was the next challenge. She couldn't just give it to them. Marcus would be suspicious. She had to create a scenario where he would have no choice but to accept it. Alara remembered her mother's friendship with Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman who lived on the other side of Sarah and Marcus. Her mother's diaries, which Alara had been reading each night, were filled with mentions of their shared cups of tea and garden gossip. Mrs. Gable was her reluctant witness. Alara baked a lemon drizzle cake, her mother's recipe, and walked over to Mrs. Gable's immaculate little bungalow. The old woman was wary at first, her eyes darting nervously towards the house next door. But the sight of Eleanor Vance's daughter, holding Eleanor Vance's signature cake, softened her. Alara didn't press. She talked about her mother, about the house, about memories. Slowly, Mrs. Gable began to open up. "He's not right, that one," she said, her voice a low whisper, nodding towards Marcus's house. "The way he speaks to that little boy when he thinks no one can hear. So cold. And Sarah, she's like a ghost of herself. She used to be so bubbly when they first moved in." Mrs. Gable confirmed she had heard yelling. She had seen Leo being forced to stand in the corner of the yard for hours. But she was terrified. "He's an important man, dear. He's on the town planning committee. He knows people. What can an old woman like me do?" "You can help me," Alara said gently. "I have a birthday gift for Leo. I was hoping you might give it to them. Say it's from you. A welcome to the neighborhood and happy birthday gesture." "He'll never suspect you," Mrs. Gable hesitated, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly. But then her eyes hardened with a spark of her old friend Eleanor's spirit. "For that little boy? Yes. Yes, I'll do it." The plan worked perfectly. The next day, Mrs. Gable trotted over with the large, gift-wrapped box. From her window, Alara watched the exchange. Marcus was all smiles, thanking the sweet old woman for her thoughtfulness. He couldn't possibly refuse the gift without looking like a monster. The Trojan bear was inside the gates. The waiting was the hardest part. For the first 24 hours, the bear's recorder picked up nothing but the muffled sounds of a child's bedroom. Leo whispering to the bear, the rustle of bedsheets. Alara felt a pang of guilt, eavesdropping on these private, innocent moments. But she held her course. Then, on the second night, it happened. The recorder activated, triggered by a loud voice. It was Marcus. The video feed was dark, but the audio was crystal clear and chilling. "I told you to clean this room. What is this? What did I tell you?" There was the sound of toys being thrown, plastic clattering against a wall. Leo's voice was small, trembling. "I did clean it. Don't lie to me." Marcus roared, his voice venomous. "You're lazy and defiant, just like your mother. You know what happens to liars." There was a long, terrifying silence. Then the sound of a belt being unbuckled. Leo started to cry, not loudly, but with the choked, hopeless sobs of a child who knows what's coming and is powerless to stop it. Alara's blood ran cold. She listened, her entire body rigid with fury and disgust, as Marcus berated the child. The psychological torture far worse than any physical punishment. He didn't hit him, not then. He was too smart for that. He used the threat, the fear. He made the boy stand in the closet for an hour as punishment. Alara saved the recording, her hands shaking. This was it. This was the proof. Over the next few days, the bear became Leo's silent confidant and Alara's star witness. It recorded Marcus belittling Sarah, telling her she was imagining things when she expressed concern for Leo. It recorded him on the phone with creditors, lying smoothly about payments that were in the mail. It recorded him coaching Leo on what to say if a teacher ever asked about bruises, which he explained away as just roughhousing. "Because you're a clumsy kid, aren't you?" He was creating a narrative, a fortress of lies to protect himself. The most critical piece of evidence came a week after the bear was delivered. Alara, reviewing the daily uploads, stumbled upon a recording that made her breath catch. It was a conversation between Marcus and Sarah about a doctor's appointment. "I'm telling you, Sarah, Dr. Albright agrees with me. He says Leo has clear signs of oppositional defiant disorder. This discipline isn't just my idea. It's part of a prescribed treatment plan." Sarah sounded uncertain. "It just seems so harsh, Marcus. He's just a little boy. It's what he needs," Marcus said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "I have the doctor's report right here. It's for his own good. Now stop questioning me. You're not a doctor." Alara's heart pounded. Oppositional defiant disorder. Prescribed treatment plan. This was his shield. This was the plausible, professional-sounding excuse he would use to justify his cruelty to any authority figure. He wasn't just an abuser. He was a sophisticated, calculating monster who had thought of everything. But Alara had a feeling his shield was made of paper. She immediately tasked her PI with investigating Dr. Albright. The results were staggering. Dr. Albright was not a pediatrician or a child psychologist. He was a disgraced general practitioner whose license had been suspended twice, once for insurance fraud. He now ran a small, private wellness clinic that specialized in alternative therapies and, for the right price, providing whatever medical documentation a client needed. Marcus hadn't gotten a diagnosis. He had bought one. Alara instructed the PI to get a copy of that report, no matter the cost. 2 days later, a scanned copy appeared in her secure inbox. It was exactly as she'd imagined. A vague, jargon-filled document, signed by the disgraced doctor, diagnosing Leo with a severe behavioral disorder and recommending a structured, high-consequence disciplinary regimen. It was a prescription for abuse. And Marcus had paid $5,000 for it. Alara now had it all. The audio of the emotional abuse, the video from the yard, the financial records showing Marcus was a fraud, the background check revealing a history of intimidation. And now a forged medical document, a conspiracy to commit fraud and justify child abuse. She had her airtight case. She finally had enough ammunition to not just stop Marcus, but to utterly destroy him. The time for quiet observation was over. It was time to bring in the heavy artillery. With a meticulously organized digital file containing video clips, audio recordings, financial reports, and the fraudulent medical document, Alara knew her next step was to secure a legal ally. This was no longer a situation that could be resolved by a simple call to the police. Marcus was too slippery, too well-versed in manipulation. She needed someone who could navigate the legal system with strategic precision, someone who would see this not just as a case, but as a cause. She needed Amelia Croft. Amelia was a legend in family law, a shark in a designer suit with a reputation for taking on the most difficult, sensitive cases and winning them. She was brilliant, relentless, and famously expensive. Alara had crossed paths with her once during a hostile corporate takeover and had been impressed by her incisive intellect and utter fearlessness. She made the call. "Amelia, it's Alara Vance. I need to see you. It's a matter of the utmost urgency concerning the welfare of a child." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Alara Vance," Amelia said, her voice crisp and professional. "I thought you'd dropped off the face of the earth." "My office." 1 hour Alara arrived at the sleek, downtown law office with a single encrypted hard drive. She was led into a corner office with a panoramic view of the city she had once called home. Amelia Croft was exactly as she remembered. Sharp, impeccably dressed, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She gestured for Alara to sit. "This had better be good," Amelia said, forgoing any pleasantries. "I've cleared my afternoon." Alara didn't waste time. She laid out the entire story, from the moment she saw Leo in the garden to the discovery of the fraudulent medical report. She spoke calmly, presenting the facts in a logical, chronological order, stripping the emotion from her voice to let the horror of the evidence speak for itself. Amelia listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Alara was finished, she slid the hard drive across the polished mahogany desk. "The evidence is on there. Video, audio, financial documents, everything." Amelia plugged the drive into her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard. For the next hour, the only sound in the room was the soft click of her mouse as she reviewed the files. She watched the video of Leo holding the buckets. She listened to the audio of Marcus terrorizing the boy in his bedroom. She read the PI's report on his debts and the restraining order. She scrutinized the forged medical document from the quack doctor. When she finally looked up, the professional mask was gone. Her eyes were blazing with a cold, controlled fury that mirrored Alara's own. "The man is a monster," she said, her voice low and tight. "A classic narcissistic sociopath. He's been grooming both of them, the mother and the child, for months, isolating them, breaking them down. This report from Dr. Albright. This is a prosecutor's dream. Conspiracy, fraud, endangerment. We can bury him." "I don't just want him buried," Alara said, her voice like steel. "I want him publicly annihilated. I want his entire world to collapse. I want everyone who ever bought his charming act to see him for what he is." Amelia nodded slowly, a grim smile touching her lips. "I agree. A quiet arrest won't be enough. He'll hire a slick lawyer, try to cut a deal, paint the mother as unstable. We need to detonate this in a way he can't control. We need to strip him of his power, and his power comes from his public image." They began to strategize, their two formidable minds working in perfect sync. They mapped out the legal filings, the coordination with the district attorney's office, and the engagement with Child Protective Services. Amelia had a trusted contact in the DA's office, a woman who specialized in crimes against children and had no patience for theatrics. They would bring her in, but only when the time was right. The key, Amelia argued, was the timing and the venue of the exposure. It had to be a moment of his own choosing, a stage where he felt most powerful and secure. Alara's PI had already provided the perfect opportunity. In 2 weeks, Marcus Thorne was scheduled to be the master of ceremonies at the annual Founders' Day Charity Gala, the biggest social event of the year in their town. He would be on stage, in a tuxedo, basking in the applause of the community he had so successfully duped. "That's our stage," Amelia said, her eyes gleaming. "We'll let him walk right into the spotlight. And then we'll burn the whole theater down around him." While Amelia began to put the legal pieces in place, Alara focused on the other front. Sarah. She knew that for any long-term solution to work, Sarah had to be a part of it. She couldn't just be rescued. She had to participate in her own liberation. But she was terrified, isolated, and brainwashed. A direct confrontation would only scare her further into Marcus's control. Alara needed a different approach. She learned from Mrs. Gable that Sarah attended a small book club that met every Wednesday morning at a local cafe. Marcus, conveniently, had a standing business lunch at the same time. It was the only time Sarah was truly alone. The following Wednesday, Alara went to the cafe. She sat at a corner table, pretending to read. She watched Sarah interact with the other women. She looked like a woman playing a part, her smiles forced, her contributions to the conversation hesitant. When the meeting ended and the other women left, Sarah lingered, stirring her cold coffee. Alara walked over to her table. "Sarah," she said gently, "can I join you for a moment?" Sarah looked up, her eyes wide with panic. "I can't. Marcus doesn't want me talking to you." "I know," Alara said, sitting down anyway. "But I need you to listen. This isn't about being a good neighbor. This is about your son." Alara didn't show her the evidence. She didn't tell her about the cameras or the private investigator. Instead, she spoke to her mother to mother. She described what she had seen, what she had heard in Marcus's voice. She talked about the subtle ways he was undermining Sarah's confidence, the way he was isolating her from her own child. "He is trying to convince you that you are the problem," Alara said, her voice filled with a compassion that was utterly genuine, "so that you will never question him. He is trying to convince you that your son is broken, so that you will allow him to fix him with cruelty. This is not love, Sarah. It is control." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, tears of confusion, fear, and a dawning, terrible recognition. "But he's so good to me sometimes," she whispered, the classic defense of an abuse victim. "He says he's just trying to protect us." "He is protecting himself," Alara corrected softly. "I have proof, Sarah. Irrefutable proof of what he is doing, of the lies he has told. When the time comes, I will use it. But I want you to be ready. I want you to be on the right side." On Leo's side, Alara slid a small, plain business card across the table. It had a single phone number on it. "This is a private number. It's for a woman named Amelia Croft. She's the best family lawyer in the state. She can explain your rights. She can help you protect your son. When you are ready, call her. She's waiting." Sarah stared at the card as if it were a life raft. She didn't take it immediately. She was still terrified. Alara stood up to leave. "Your son is brave, Sarah. He is strong. He is enduring things no child should ever have to. The question is, are you brave enough to save him?" She left the cafe, leaving the card on the table. The choice was now Sarah's. The plan was in motion. All the players were in position. The next 2 weeks would be an agonizing wait. But Alara was patient. She had built an empire on patience and strategy. And now she was using those same skills to save a life. As the day of the charity gala approached, a palpable tension settled over Sycamore Lane. Marcus, with his finely tuned predatory instincts, sensed a shift in the atmosphere. He didn't know the specifics of the storm gathering just over the horizon, but he could feel the drop in pressure. He noticed Alara's watchful presence from her window, and while he initially found it amusing, it was now beginning to unnerve him. Her silence was more threatening than any outburst would have been. His response was to tighten his grip. He became more controlling with Sarah, questioning her about her day, checking her phone, forbidding her from going to her book club. He told her that Alara was a lonely, unstable woman who was trying to cause trouble for them out of jealousy. "She's a recluse, Sarah. These people are eccentric. You can't trust her," he'd say, his voice dripping with false concern. He also escalated his discipline with Leo, but he was clever enough to keep it indoors, away from the prying eyes of the cameras in the tree. The teddy bear, however, continued its silent watch. It recorded Marcus forcing Leo to write sentences hundreds of times. "I will not be defiant," until his small hand cramped. It recorded him locking the boy's favorite toys in a box, claiming they were a distraction from his responsibilities. He was trying to reassert his dominance, to crush the small flicker of hope that Alara's presence had ignited in the household. He was making a show of his power, unaware that every move he made was being documented. His most significant countermove, however, was a public one. 2 days before the gala, an article appeared in the local online newspaper. It was a glowing profile of Marcus Thorne, the town's dynamic new resident, philanthropist, and dedicated family man. It quoted him extensively about his passion for community service and his commitment to building a strong family. The article included a professionally taken photo of Marcus, Sarah, and Leo, all smiling for the camera. Sarah's smile was a fragile, paper-thin thing, and Leo's was entirely absent from his eyes. But to the casual observer, they looked like the perfect family. Marcus had planted the story himself, a preemptive strike designed to bolster his public image, to inoculate himself against any potential rumors. He was defining the narrative before anyone else could. Alara read the article, her expression unreadable. Amelia called her the moment it was published. "He's getting nervous," Amelia said. "He's shoring up his defenses. This is good. It means he's arrogant. He's walking onto that stage feeling untouchable." The article had an unintended effect. It was the final push Sarah needed. Seeing that photograph, that grotesque lie of a happy family printed for the world to see, while knowing the truth of the fear and misery within her own home, finally broke the spell. That afternoon, while Marcus was out, she retrieved the business card Alara had given her. With a trembling hand, she dialed the number. The conversation she had with Amelia Croft was quiet, tearful, and ultimately transformative. Amelia didn't just offer legal advice. She offered a lifeline. She validated Sarah's fears, confirmed that what was happening was not just wrong but illegal, and laid out a clear, safe plan for her and Leo. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a surge of strength. The fear was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, protective maternal rage. Her son's future was on the line, and she was done being a passive victim. She agreed to cooperate fully. She would play her part, acting the dutiful, supportive partner for the next 48 hours. She would stand by his side at the gala, smiling, while knowing that by the end of the night, her life of terror would be over. The stage was set. The trap was laid. Marcus Thorne, feeling more confident and celebrated than ever, was about to give the performance of his life. He had no idea it would also be his last. The night of the Founders' Day charity gala was a swirl of champagne, string music, and self-congratulatory speeches. The grand ballroom of the local country club was filled with the town's most influential citizens, all dressed in their finest. At the center of it all was Marcus Thorne, a vision of success and charisma in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, shaking hands, accepting compliments, his arm possessively around Sarah's waist. She played her part beautifully, her face a mask of serene support, a skill she had perfected over months of living a lie. But tonight, her quiet compliance was not a sign of submission. It was an act of war. Alara Vance arrived late, a deliberate choice. She had no interest in the social niceties. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, her only adornment a pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother. She didn't blend in. She stood out, a figure of quiet, formidable gravity in a room full of frivolous chatter. She took a position at the back of the ballroom, near the main entrance, her presence a silent, ominous note in the symphony of the evening. Amelia Croft was already there, seated at a table with 2 plain-clothed individuals Alara recognized as Detective Miller, Amelia's trusted police contact, and a stern-looking woman from the Department of Child and Family Services. They were sipping water, their eyes scanning the room, waiting. The plan was in place. Leo was not at the event. He was safely with Mrs. Gable, who was spoiling him with cookies and cartoons, blissfully unaware of the drama about to unfold. At 9 o'clock, the lights dimmed. The president of the town council took the stage to introduce the man of the hour. And now, it is my great pleasure to introduce a man who, in a very short time, has become an invaluable member of our community. A man whose dedication to family and charity is an inspiration to us all. Mr. Marcus Thorne. The room erupted in applause. Marcus strode onto the stage, beaming, waving to the crowd. He soaked in the adoration, his ego swelling with every clap. This was his element, his kingdom. He stepped up to the podium, cleared his throat, and began his speech. It was a masterpiece of empty sentiment, filled with platitudes about community, giving back, and the importance of a strong moral foundation for our children. Alara listened, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. She let him get 5 minutes in, just long enough for him to feel completely in control, completely safe. Then, she began her walk. She moved from the back of the room towards the stage, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. She didn't run. She didn't shout. Her progress was calm, deliberate, and utterly inexorable. A murmur rippled through the crowd as people turned to watch the silent, elegant woman in black. Marcus faltered mid-sentence, his eyes locking onto hers. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, followed by a flash of genuine alarm. He tried to recover, to dismiss her with his charm. "Ah," he said into the microphone, forcing a laugh. "It seems we have a surprise guest. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Alara Vance, my neighbor. So good of you to join us on stage. Did you want to make a donation?" His arrogance was his undoing. "I have," Alara said, her voice calm and clear as she reached the steps to the stage. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice carried a natural authority that commanded silence. "I've come to make a contribution to the truth." She walked past him to the large screen that had been displaying the gala's logo. In her hand was a small remote. With a single click, the logo vanished, replaced by a still photograph. It was a crystal-clear image of Leo, his face pale with strain, holding the 2 heavy buckets of water in the backyard. A collective gasp went through the ballroom. Marcus's face went white. "What is this?" he stammered into the microphone. "This is some kind of sick joke. That was a game. A harmless game." "Let's listen to the game," Alara said, and clicked the remote again. The room was filled with the audio from the teddy bear. It was the recording from Leo's bedroom. Marcus's voice, filled with rage. "Don't lie to me. You're lazy and defiant. You know what happens to liars." Followed by the sound of the belt, and Leo's terrified, choked sobs. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, profound. The smiling faces in the crowd had turned to masks of shock and horror. People were staring at Marcus not as a hero, but as a monster. "This is doctored audio," he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "She's a crazy, vindictive woman. She's been harassing my family." "Are these doctored, Marcus?" Alara said, her voice cutting through his frantic denials. She clicked again. The scanned image of the fraudulent medical report from Dr. Albright appeared on the screen, the signature clear, the diagnosis stark. A report from a doctor who lost his license for fraud. A $5,000 prescription for child abuse. Marcus was unraveling. The charming facade had been utterly incinerated, revealing the snarling, pathetic creature beneath. "Lies. All of it. Sarah. Tell them she's lying." He turned desperately to his wife, who had remained silent at the side of the stage. Sarah stepped forward into the spotlight, her face pale but her eyes clear and strong for the first time in a long time. She looked not at Marcus, but at the stunned faces in the audience. "Everything you have heard," she said, her voice shaking but firm, "is true. I was afraid. I was weak. But I will not be silent anymore. He hurt my son. That was the final, devastating blow. The testimony of his victim, delivered in her own voice." Marcus let out a strangled cry of rage and lunged, not at Alara, but at Sarah. But he never reached her. Detective Miller and the other officer were already on the stage. They intercepted him, grabbing his arms and forcing them behind his back with practiced efficiency. The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the silent room. As they led him away, a babbling, pathetic wreck stripped of all his power and prestige, Marcus Thorne looked back at Alara. His eyes were filled with a pure, unadulterated hatred. Alara met his gaze without flinching, her expression one of cold, quiet victory. She had made a vow and she had kept it. The monster had been dragged into the light. The aftermath of the gala was swift and decisive. The story was a firestorm, sweeping through the town and beyond. Marcus Thorne's public crucifixion was total. His name became synonymous with deceit and cruelty. His business associates deserted him. His so-called friends denied ever really knowing him, and the charities he had championed publicly disavowed him. The legal case, bolstered by the mountain of evidence Alara and Amelia had compiled, was a formality. Facing charges of child endangerment, fraud, and intimidation, and with Sarah's powerful testimony against him, Marcus's high-priced lawyer quickly advised him to take a plea deal. He was sentenced to a substantial prison term, his world reduced from a country club ballroom to a concrete cell. His downfall was as complete as it was deserved. For Sarah and Leo, the journey was just beginning. The days following the gala were a blur of interviews with social workers, therapists, and lawyers. Alara shielded them from the worst of the media frenzy, using her resources to ensure their privacy and safety. She moved them out of the house on Sycamore Lane and into a secure, comfortable suite she kept in the city, a quiet sanctuary where they could begin to heal. Sarah was racked with guilt over her complicity, her failure to protect her son sooner. It was a heavy burden, one that would take years of therapy to process. But beneath the guilt was a core of resilient strength Alara had known was there. With Marcus's oppressive influence gone, Sarah began to find her voice again, to reclaim her identity as a mother and as an individual. She threw herself into therapy with the same fierce determination she had shown on that stage, not just for herself but for Leo. The courts, guided by recommendations from child services and Amelia's expert navigation, had to decide on Leo's future. While Sarah was his biological mother and a victim herself, it was clear she was not yet in a position to be his sole caregiver. The trauma she had endured had left deep wounds. In a move that surprised everyone but Alara and Amelia, Sarah herself proposed the solution. During a closed custody hearing, she stood before the judge and made a brave, selfless request. She asked that Alara Vance be granted legal guardianship of Leo. "My son needs stability, safety, and a strength that I don't have right now," Sarah said, her voice thick with tears but steady with conviction. "Alara gave him that. She saved him. She is the only person I trust to give him the childhood he deserves while I work on becoming the mother he needs." Alara, who had been prepared to fund Leo's care from a distance, was stunned. She had never envisioned this. Her life was a solitary fortress, not a home for a child. But as she looked at Leo, who was sitting quietly in the courtroom, clutching the smooth gray wishing stone she had given him, she felt the walls of that fortress begin to crumble. She saw not a burden but a chance to heal a part of herself she thought was long dead, a chance to rewrite a tragic ending from her own past. She accepted. The legal process was finalized, and Alara Vance, the reclusive millionaire, became the guardian of a small, quiet boy with wounded eyes. She sold her sterile city penthouse and her mother's empty house on Sycamore Lane. They were places haunted by ghosts of the past. She bought a new house, a rambling, light-filled home on a quiet stretch of coastline, with a big, wild garden and a view of the endless ocean. It was a place for new beginnings. Months melted into a year. The house by the sea filled with a quiet warmth it had never known. The silence was no longer the empty, echoing quiet of solitude, but the peaceful, companionable silence of two people learning to trust each other. Alara discovered a patience she never knew she possessed. She learned the rhythms of a child's life, the importance of a consistent bedtime story, the magical healing properties of a bandage, the simple joy of finding a perfect seashell on the beach. She didn't try to replace his mother. Sarah was a constant, positive presence in their lives, visiting every weekend, her strength and confidence growing with each passing week. Their phone calls were nightly rituals. Alara was not a mother in the traditional sense. She was something else. A guardian, a protector, a safe harbor. Leo, in turn, began to unfurl like a flower that has been deprived of sunlight. The haunted, watchful look in his eyes was gradually replaced by the carefree curiosity of a child. He started talking more, his voice growing stronger, more confident. He filled sketchbooks with drawings, no longer of dark, shadowy figures, but of bright suns, blue waves, and a smiling woman with a dog. Chester, the golden retriever, had of course come to live with them, and he was Leo's constant, furry companion. The transformation was slow, but it was profound. The turning point came on a bright, breezy afternoon. They were in the garden planting sunflowers. Leo was digging in the dirt, his face smudged with soil, chattering away about a book he was reading. Alara was watching him, a feeling of quiet, profound contentment settling over her. He stopped digging and looked up at her, his expression serious. "Alara," he said, "my arms don't hurt anymore." She knelt in front of him, her heart swelling with an emotion so powerful it almost took her breath away. "I know, Leo," she whispered, her voice thick. "They never will again." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he did something he had never done before. He launched himself forward and wrapped his small, strong arms around her neck, holding on tight. In that embrace, two broken souls found a way to become whole. Alara Vance, who had built a fortress of wealth to protect herself from the pain of the world, discovered that true strength wasn't in walls, but in opening a door. And so, a story that began in the shadows of cruelty and fear found its end in the warmth of the sun. It reminds us that evil often wears a charming mask, thriving in the silence of those too afraid to speak up. It hides behind manicured hedges and public accolades, preying on the vulnerable and counting on the world to look the other way. But it also shows us that goodness does not always need to be loud. Sometimes, it is a quiet, watchful presence, a steady and unwavering resolve that refuses to accept the unacceptable. True strength is not the power to dominate, but the courage to protect. It is the millionaire who uses her wealth not for comfort, but for justice. It is the frightened mother who finds the will to speak her truth. It is the little boy who holds onto a small stone and a flicker of hope. How many silent victims are waiting for a voice? How many reluctant witnesses are looking away, hoping someone else will step in? The world is full of shadows, but a single, determined light can, and always will, drive them away. We all have the capacity to be that light for someone. Have you ever witnessed a situation where your intuition told you something was deeply wrong? Have you ever had to find the courage to speak up for someone who couldn't speak for themselves? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your experiences give strength to others who may be facing their own darkness. Thank you for being a part of this community, and may you always have the courage to be the protector someone needs.